Savannah,
Like,
you might have to individually make a host because I can't start my video yet. So if you want to make me a host, I'll turn mine on, and then you'll have to do the same for Joel, and then you can take it back.
yeah, we're not secretly just wanting the power.
There we go. We don't want the power. There we go. All right, Joel's turn.
All right, let's see. Let me know when still saying unable. Yeah, it just says you unable to start video
Savannah,
because
did you
host
switch
is
host to Joel? Sorry, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Well, we can pause recording, I guess, until we get the video sorted. We'll get there.
It is not allowing me to make him the host. You should be able to, since you're the host.
Make host. Here we go. I have to do it. There you go, Joel.
perfect. There we go.
There we go.
Yes.
Hello. We're here. We made it.
It's good to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your patience while we work out some tech things. It's just part of life in our tech world. This is a man who needs no introduction, likely. I don't think anyone hears recruitment and social media without knowing who Joel is. I can introduce you. I can sing your praises, but I always like for our guests to introduce themselves, who you are, what you're doing, what you're all about, maybe why you're the realest recruiter.
Love to. I love that. Well, okay, so my name's Joel Lalgee. I've been in recruitment since 2015, where I fell into it like so many of us do. I spent a lot of time in the agency world, primarily working with a it's kind of like an RPO, I don't want to call it, but it had a slightly different model than maybe traditional RPOs, but spent a lot of time working in a lot of different industries. Obviously just worked with a ton of clients, ton of hiring managers. And one of the things that I noticed when I got into recruitment, especially with the agency I was at, like everything was about disruption and like coming up with new and cool stuff. But when it came to like the marketing and content, it wasn't something that was a focus for our company. So everything was outbound focused, cold calls, emails, DMs, in-mails, whatever it was, everything was outbound. And I started seeing a trend, I think in 2019. Probably a trend that we all saw, but I just started hearing people talk about this content, and how content, if you use it right, can attract people to you. And I thought, it'd be really nice if I didn't have to go out and message candidates every single time, or if I didn't have to message clients and try and convince them to work with me. And so I became really probably obsessed, it's the best word, but just like became really fascinated with this idea of social media as a way to build relationships at scale, and as just a way to get your brand and who you are and the positions you're recruiting for out there in the public. And so I've just spent a lot of time over the last 4 years, which seems like such a long time, but it's kind of flown by at the same time as well. But spent a lot of time just figuring out how do these different social media platforms work? What are the best ways to interact with people? Is it about is getting millions of views the most important thing, or is building followers and getting huge follower counts, is that important, or is flying under the radar and just being consistent? So I've just had a lot of time to see kind of what works, what doesn't, and now I get the honor of working with recruiting teams across the globe. And as a recruiting team, like how can we actually come together and stay consistent with content and help get the brand out more consistently to really impact like the outreach that we're doing, and then obviously as consistency comes, start to get the inbound of people that you're wanting to talk to. So that's what I'm about. It's my
That's what you're about.
quick, long intro.
I like it. Very interesting that you say the time has flown since you've started doing it, because when we were preparing for this, I said, oh, it was about 2 years ago that Joel and I first talked. And then I looked back and I went, nope, that was 3 years ago, almost to the day. It was 3 years ago that we had our first conversation about it. So you definitely have seen things cycle through of what works and what doesn't work. So we're really glad that you are here to share all this insight with us. Everyone, drop your thoughts, your comments, your questions into the chat as we're going. As you think of it, don't feel like you have to wait till the end, and then we'll cover everything at the end. So let's start with a simple, easy one to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. What's the difference between an employer brand and a personal brand for recruiters to do that social selling? Let's start with something easy.
It's a great question, right? And I think to me, when I think of employer brand, it's very much like just traditional marketing with a like a recruitment angle to it. So when I think of traditional marketing, it is all about font type and visual. What are the colors? What's the feeling? Like, what's the brand? And it's the same with traditional marketing, right? It's like traditional marketing teams, like you've got a brand voice, you've got a vision for what the brand is, and everything matters. Like visually, everything matters. You want to stay within what your brand represents, because those things matter at the end of the day. Like when you see Apple, when you see Nike, when you see Meta, maybe not so much, but when you see these brands, you really do associate certain things with them. And so with employer brand, it's what's our culture like? How do we treat people? What's the teamwork like? What's it like to work here? But it's more of like a formal kind of methodology around it. And what we've seen emerge, particularly in the B2B space, I would say really over the last 3 to 5 years, is this idea of personal brand. And I think personal brand is I think of it in the context of a phone call with a recruiter, right? Because there's this weird balance where you're kind of building rapport individual to individual. So I'm trying to build a good relationship with the candidate, and you do that on a personal level, right? Or like you're trying to get a connection with them. What did you do this weekend? Tell me about your life. And you start to find out things about your candidate, right, on the personal side, and maybe you're giving a little bit of personal context for that. And so when you're building a personal brand online, it has that same element. Like you're kind of giving your audience and the people that you're connecting with a feel for like who you are. And that's the major delineation. So I just think there's like less formality with a personal brand, but a smart personal brand, especially within a recruitment context, you never lose the company you're representing with. And I think this is kind of the danger that's happening with a lot of personal branding that's out there, is people get turned off by it because it has become extremely self-promotional. It's become all about the person instead of, how I really would train people is to think about who are your candidates and what's going to be valuable for them. And really the goal of a recruiter building a personal brand should be, you want to be a value source. So when people think of a recruiter in whatever space you're in, you want them to think positively about you, and you kind of want to be that go-to person. And so, a good recruiter personal brand has to have that balance. But that's the major difference between the two in my mind.
Okay. So leveraging social media, that's the big topic, what we're here for. Leveraging social media to attract talent. You've touched on a little bit and how important it is. In your opinion, how much does it warm up that cold call if you have a strong personal brand?
Yeah, I just think the likelihood of it being a completely cold call it's reduced significantly. And the longer you're consistent with content, the more warm every call you get on is. And I can obviously I can use myself as an example for this, but there's a lot of people who are building personal brands. So I think of even like our relationship, how it started. Like when I remember when the first time we met, you're at the hospital and you're like, yeah, I feel like I know you. So like that's usually what the response is, right? So I just think of it, as a candidate, if you're trying to reach out to a candidate, if you're trying to reach out to a sales prospect, whoever it is, if you've worked your personal brand correctly and you've been consistent, you've connected with them, it really does turn those calls into, at least I know who, another common thing you hear is, yeah, I've seen some of your stuff around. That's a lot easier to start the conversation with than, hey, here's my quick introduction, right? There's a big difference. So I think it's massive.
Yeah, for sure. Now, with the length of time that you've been producing content, you've switched tactics a couple of times. For a while there, it was only GIFs. For a while, it was, you're deep into the TikTok world now. You do Twitter as well. How did you decide to start branching out into all these different social platforms? Because LinkedIn is where many of us are the most comfortable. So what made you kind of take the plunge into all of the other spaces?
Yeah, I just realized that, like, I think outside of recruiters, when I talk to people, I was gonna say real people. When I talk to people who are not in the recruitment space or job search space or career coach space, or they're not a marketer or salespeople, and even a lot of them. But when I talk to people who are like my life, who are offline, if I ask them how much time they spend on LinkedIn, a lot of them are like, yeah, I probably go on there once or twice a year and sign in. I just don't spend that much time. And when you actually look at the statistics of how much people are spending time on LinkedIn, it's not really that much. I don't even think it's a top 20 social network actually for where people spend time, which I think might be surprising, but you can just Google that. But the places that are at the top are Facebook. Is still, people spend a lot of time on Facebook. Platforms like YouTube, obviously people spend a lot of time on. TikTok has emerged pretty quickly as somewhere that people are spending hours a day on. Twitter, people spend a lot of time on. And so I started just asking the question, like, is LinkedIn, is it the only place that recruiters should be? And I think this is the question. If you want to figure out like where you spend time, ask the people that you're recruiting. And it might seem odd, it may be an odd question, but it's really not that odd. If you were just like, hey, so, where do what's your favorite social media network? People would tell you like, oh, I spend hours on TikTok. You hear that 5 times, and maybe TikTok's a valuable place to be. For me, LinkedIn made a ton of sense. And even going back to like the memes and the GIFs, like, well, where did that come from? It literally came from the fact that I was producing a lot of content. And at the time I was trying to get a hold of recruitment agency owners, and I was having a tough time. I was like, there's a lot of like recruiters engaging with my content, but not enough to where it's like getting in front of these agency owners. And so I just thought, well, what would be the easiest way for me to get in front of an agency owner? And I thought, well, if I could get every single recruiter on their team liking my content, then maybe that would be a good way to get in front of these agency owners. And that's why I just thought, who produces content that goes viral all the time on LinkedIn? Adam Karpiak, right? And he's definitely like job seeker focused. We all know Adam. And I was like, you know what? Humor works really, really well on social media. I'm going to hit this angle. Most recruiters I know and I've interacted with have like a sense of humor. I think you have to have a sense of humor in recruitment. And so I thought, that's going to be a way for me just to get awareness, mass awareness. And so I did it, and it worked really, really well, really, really quickly to get more just awareness. But then I started running into the problem of, I don't want to just be known as like the meme guy. And it still happens today where people are like, I love your memes. I'm like, okay, that's great. But I wanted to add a depth of content in there as well. And so I think that, Twitter for me has been a great platform for that, because it's just more posting your thoughts and more of your conscious. So, and again, like my methodology is going to be like, I would never train a team to do what I do. It just wouldn't make sense. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out like, how do these platforms work, and like what platforms are going to make the most sense for people. And that's because that's the service I'm providing, right? I think if you're thinking of where do I spend time as a recruiter, number one, where are your candidates at? Is it LinkedIn? Maybe. Is it Facebook? Could be Facebook. And whatever platform it is, that's what you're developing a strategy around and figuring out, okay, that's where I'm spending time. And then the way that I think of content is, like, for me, LinkedIn's still pretty big. So I spend 60% of my time on LinkedIn, probably 30% of my time on TikTok and 10% of my time on Twitter. And so I break it down. So you want to think, spend most time where people are at in your ideal audience, and then always spend a little bit of time experimenting on different platforms, because I think that's just how you get to become a better content creator at the end of the day.
For sure. I know when I was recruiting nurses, I would spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, but when I would search for them, you would see that people were not on the platform. You could tell they hadn't commented on anything. So I started doing that research thinking, well, if they're not on LinkedIn, where are they? And they're all on Facebook. There's millions of nurses on Facebook. So you have to shift gears with it. I think I'm getting messages from Savannah that there's issue where others are not in this Zoom. We need to change for the practice session and admit them. Savannah, is that still the problem?
I do believe we've resolved our tech issue. From what I can see, there's 25 attendees in the room.
Okay.
But for anyone who was late, we are so sorry about that. And we are happy to have Joel and Krista here with us today.
Yes, we apologize. I didn't know that I don't pay attention to the numbers while we're going. So we apologize. We've mostly been doing introductions of how Joel got his start. We're very happy that everyone is here. Apologies for the tech delays. The good news is that this is being recorded. So if you need to go back and watch the first 10 minutes or so, you will be able to. But I promise we haven't gotten to the real juicy good stuff yet. We haven't gotten to the Joel advice yet. It's more of an introduction. So thank you so much for everyone who's here. We're very apologetic about the tech issues. So Joel, thank you for that. We were just talking about kind of how you started exploring other platforms and why we need to figure out where the audience is. Now, a lot of people who are here are very busy. We're all busy. Recruitment is very busy. Repurposing content. How can people take one piece of content and use it across multiple platforms so they don't have to create something brand new?
Yeah, this is and by the way, Aaron Sheltry, I see you. I used to work with Aaron at the company I mentioned at the beginning, so nice to see him there. But yeah, look, this idea of repurposing is something where I think you've got to have created content for a little bit to be able to do this. But essentially, one of the secrets that I have in terms of creating as much content as I do and almost appearing everywhere at every moment and every day is I repurpose or at times reuse content. And so this is a really interesting experiment that I've been doing, and I like to blend all of my content together. So if I post something on Twitter and it does well on Twitter, I know that's an indication that if I post the same thing on LinkedIn, it's going to do well on LinkedIn because I have kind of similar audiences, although on LinkedIn, it's a bigger audience. On Twitter, I think I got like 10,000 followers. So, but then I started thinking, well, I wonder what would happen if I took a tweet, so it's a short tweet, which they're a little bit longer now. You can write longer ones. Thank God that they changed that. I really like that functionality. But I started thinking, what if I just read the actual text on a TikTok video? And so I played around with this idea a lot. And what I found is if you have a good piece of content or content that people resonate with, you can get it across each platform. The key is you just got to know how each platform works. So for example, if I posted something around, I'm just going to think of a really easy topic, like ghosting candidates, right? That's one that everybody I think can agree with. And LinkedIn loves this type of content. But let's say if I did a tweet around ghosting candidates and like why it's wrong. If I take that same text and I post it to LinkedIn, it's probably going to do well. And then if I just read that same point or kind of make the same point on TikTok, it will also do well on the platform. So I've just realized that yes, there's different tactics for each platform, but on the whole, if you're staying in your niche and you're talking about the same things over and over, the same topic is going to resonate to the same audience because you're kind of building similar audiences. So the way that I think about this is let's say this sounds really overwhelming already to you and you want to think of just LinkedIn. The way I think about this on LinkedIn is I've realized that, number one, people don't remember a piece of content that you posted a day ago, let alone a month ago. But what I realized is if you can start to produce like a library of content, you can start to then reuse content, and that saves you a ton of time. And so what I've done is I've created almost like a library of old content, old videos, just all my content that I've ever produced. Like I have literally a Google Doc with all of that content. And then what I'll do is on days that I'm not feeling inspired or days where I just don't have enough time, I'll literally go through and repost the same thing. So if you go to my profile right now, I have a GIF or meme around how you get started in recruitment that I have probably my 5th time posting this over the last 2 years. If you go to that post right now, you can see it. It's got like 500 likes and a bunch of reactions. But again, it's done well in the past. It's gonna do well again. So as you're starting, you might have to produce more new content. But as you go on in your journey, this is one thing that people I don't think understand is you get to kind of reuse the same things over and over, which saves a ton of time, but it also allows you to be more efficient as well. And again, just it's a good practice to get into.
Sure. My life-saving technique is if I write a comment or someone gives me a good comment, I'll screenshot that, and you can easily turn that into a post later as well. So I think there's a lot of great ways to get inspired for content. Now, you talked a lot
I love
about
that, by the way.
mixing. Yeah, I have a whole folder on my phone that's just screenshots of comments to pull from. Now, everyone on this call and everyone who's going to watch it later has heard this isn't Facebook, don't post personal. There may be people on this call who are thinking, well, how do I balance this between memes, funny, actionable advice, reposting a TikTok, and personal? You and I both share personal. I know you do, not every single day. I don't every single day, but I do implement some of it. I know you do as well. How do people find that good balance, and why is a balance important?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's like defining what personal is, right? I mean, I've come to the conclusion that personal is just something that's not directly related to your job. So obviously, an open job you're working on is not personal. Anything that's like employer branded content isn't personal. News articles aren't personal. But then the level of how personal you get, it really is a personal. It's your own choice. I'd say if you're not comfortable posting things about your family, don't post about it. If you aren't comfortable posting about a topic like mental health, don't post about it. So I think like with this, it's like we're all adults. You could post what you want to post. Where I found posting the personal content, so I post a lot about my kids, is it's really interesting. Like I probably get more comments from people saying things like, hey, it's just so great to see like your family or the time you're getting to spend time with them, or like it's really cool to see that you're so involved in your kids' lives. So it's funny, like I've actually got a lot of great positive feedback from that. But I think if you're a recruiter and you're out there and you're like, hey, I don't feel like putting my family out there or talking about myself personally, then don't do it. But I still think that within the recruitment brand as a whole, so what people think about recruiters, a lot of times people just have really, really bad interactions and just thoughts about recruiters. So my ideology with the personal non-work related content is I'm just finding another way to like humanize myself as a recruiter, as somebody who's posting about this content. And I just think about like, I mean, to tell you the truth, and Aaron can probably testify to this because he worked with me, like I'm a pretty open book, like with anybody I meet. And I've been like that with candidates, right? So I'm not doing anything that I would talk about my kids on most calls that I'd be with candidates or prospects, whoever it is. I talk about my kids. Well, what do you do this weekend? Yeah, hung out with the kids. So I think like your own approach to it needs to be determined like how you actually interact with people. So if you're like, hey, I'm not personal at all, that's great. But I still think there's value in just posting things that, are non-work related, because it just adds that human factor. I actually think a great person to look at for this, by the way, is Gary Vaynerchuk. Because if you follow any of his stuff, and if you don't know who that is, he's just like this major social media influencer who's been doing it for years. If you look at his content, he never posts about anything about his family or his kids. But you feel like you know him because he talks about things like kindness and empathy, and like he has a lot of worldviews that he just talks about in his content. But on the flip side, if you look at a lot of his content, he never really talks about his marketing agency and like, he rarely talks about that either. So I think like he could be a useful person to look at. And I think whenever anyone said, hey, I just don't feel comfortable with this, I'm like, great, well, post what you're comfortable about, first of all, right? You don't want to post things that are non-authentic, or if that's even a word, that's just going to rub people the wrong way.
Well, and if they get on the phone and talk to you and you are completely different than your posts, that does not go a long way when you're building that relationship with them as a candidate. And I think as a client as well, right? When my clients talk to me, they say, oh, you're exactly like you are in your post. Well, right. Because I'm like you, I'm authentic through and through. This is the person you get no matter what type of call it is. And I think that's the way more of us need to be. So I think that is great. I wanted to shift to something you talked about in our prep call that I thought was very interesting that a lot of people might not be doing. Using other platforms, not just LinkedIn, how can that help us get our finger on the pulse of what's happening? What are the issues? What are the trends? What are people worried about? How do you use the other platform? We'll say TikTok or Twitter.
Look, I think one of the reasons that clients come to you or hiring managers come to you, right? And this is what we try and aim to be as recruiters, is we want to be knowledgeable and experts in the fields that we're recruiting in, right? So if you talk to anybody who's a junior recruiter, one of the biggest challenges, I think, is just getting respect from a hiring manager or hiring authority. So that's whether you're on agency side, obviously that's huge, right? Because if they don't trust you to send good people through, they're not going to interview any of your people. But on the internal side, it's the same thing. And so the best way to build that credibility is to know what is going on. Like, what are candidates talking about? What are the trends? And I think being active in these conversations on social media, it keeps you in the pulse and the know of what's going on. So for example, like remote work is such a polarizing topic right now. But it's if you're involved in the conversations, what you start to see is it's not really about remote work, right? It's flexibility. People want flexibility. They want to work at companies that value like their personal lives and what they've got going on, right? I think there's been a big trend and a big kind of push away from that traditional mindset of like, I'm just going to be 100% loyal to any employer and I'm just going to keep my head down and work for 20 years. I don't think anyone's really thinking like that. And so I'm using that as a really big topic, but I think if you're involved in creating content or you've just got a pulse on what's going on, particularly when I think of Gen Z, for example, right? Because I think Gen Z, we're seeing a lot more like Gen Z type candidates entering the market. There's I think a lot of kind of confusion around that generation as it is, which always happens, right? Same thing happened to millennials like myself when we were entering the workforce. But I think if you're involved in these conversations on these different platforms, you just start to get a pulse of like what actual candidates care about. What is the actual experience people are going through? And so I think there's a ton of value in that. And again, you get to kind of see insights that potentially your hiring managers don't have. And then you're able to bring those insights as well into conversations you're having around. Have we thought about this? It seems like more candidates are interested in, the 4-day work week. Here's what people are saying. And I think if you can become that knowledge, if you could be those ears on the ground, it's a massive value add. And really the easy way to do that is on platforms like TikTok, maybe it's producing content, maybe it's consuming some of the content. On a platform like Twitter, I think it's just getting more involved in those conversations. Honestly, I think it's the same thing with LinkedIn as well. Like a lot of this is just getting involved in conversations, leaving your opinion, but then also like hearing what's going on and what other people are talking about.
I think it's a huge tool from that shift from being an order taker to being a consultant when it comes to recruiting, right? We all want that as recruiters. We want our voices to be heard. It doesn't always happen, but we want our voice to be heard with it. So being able to say, they don't care about that 4th week of vacation. What they do care about is knowing you're not going to dock them vacation time if they have to go to the doctors or they have to stay home with their kid, right? So I think using social media, it's massive. I know I use it that way as well to keep my finger on the pulse. All right, so let's talk about putting content out there. Do you typically recommend that people do a balance of content from their marketing team or solely their own original stuff?
So I used to be in the camp of every recruiter's got to create 3 to 5 pieces of content a week. And then I started coaching recruitment teams mainly on the agency side. And I think people can stay consistent with that for maybe a couple months at most, but I think it just becomes really like just burnout if you're asking recruiters, because recruiters are super busy. Like I think about when I was recruiting and that's all I was doing. It was like my days were just insane. I'm responding to people and putting out fires really from the first hour I'm working. So then as I was coaching teams, I just realized that like 3 to 5 times to ask a recruiter to produce that much content is just too much. So now when I'm working with teams, I'm approaching it from literally it's like a team sport. Like you've got to use this. Your company probably has tons of content that's great that people have put sweat and blood into. You know, they've got the fonts right. It looks good. It's high quality. And probably the biggest problem they have is nobody sees it. And so I start thinking about how can you add value outside, you know, again, how can you add value as a recruiter? Well, this is a huge way you can add value is by getting company employer branded content out regularly and having that as part of your way to add value to the network and still represent your company brand. And it's really easy to share that content, right? So I think it's a mix of employer branded content. I think industry news and staying on top of industry news and posting content that's valuable to your candidates that they care about is also huge. And then open jobs. That's another one, right? When I think of posting an open job, we're not saying like we're hiring, right? I mean, we've all done that, but you're telling a story. Like, can you bring the hiring manager in? Can you tell a story about the projects they're going to be working on? Can you just say anything other than we're hiring? And it's the same when you're sharing employer branded content. Sure, you could just share it, but what you're doing is you wanted to put your context on it. So maybe it's an event the company had. Okay, if you just share the event, okay, it might have some impact. But if you actually mention like why it was impactful, I met with the team in person. This is why it was great. This is how I felt. That will connect with people. And obviously if candidates are thinking about your company, you're sharing that valuable content and they're getting to get a feel for the company, but you're also putting your spin on it too. And so I think if you add in those 3 pieces of content, you should be able to produce at least show up 3 times with minimal amount of work. But again, it's putting your own spin, because one thing people forget about is like when you're connecting with people on LinkedIn, like candidates, for example, if you're connecting with candidates regularly and you're connecting with people that you've worked with in the past, most of your network should just be people you know, right? So you're sharing things about your company and you're just putting your 2 cents in there. You know, and what you do with this content, again, this is something which I just think people overthink. Literally, you're just staying top of mind. So here's a great example. Like Aaron, who I used to work with, I'm sure he can, you know, he's seen a lot of my content and we work together. It's like, I'm sure that when he sees my content, he thinks of me, right? Because that's what you do. Like if I see your content, I think of you. So literally, you just got to change your mindset and go, how do I stay in front of everybody without being annoying? You don't want to be annoying. And I literally, it's just sharing valuable insights and that valuable content. And so the only type of content that I think you would have to kind of create would be more of that personal, non-work related content, and potentially something like job seeker tips. I think you could probably create. Like if you stick to that game plan, you're able to stay consistent over time. And what it starts to do is it just starts to give you that edge when you are reaching out to people, and then people are like, oh yeah, I've seen you posting this stuff, you know, over the last year. I haven't seen every post, but I've seen enough. And then that's how you go from being that cold to that warm connection, if that makes sense.
So not just reposting for the sake of clicking repost, but always putting your spin on it and your thoughts. We all want to be experts. We are all experts. That's why we're here, is to learn and grow and develop, but adding your own thoughts on it goes a really long way and makes you known, right? We're all reaching out in the same way to people. There's no magic formula that any of us are using when we're reaching out to candidates or clients, but being known and being seen as an expert makes a huge difference.
And being like, this is a great question to ask. Like, is this content is it going to add value? And like, I know that's such a kind of a token word. And I think you've got to look at like, what is the value that you're bringing to? Because some people could be like, well, memes aren't valuable. And I'm like, sure it is. Entertainment is plenty valuable. Like, and like, what's the mindset that people have when they're on social media? I'd actually argue that most people are on social media because they're bored and they're just scrolling because they're like looking for entertainment, which is why I think humor connects. But is that the game plan? Like, no. Right. I think it's, and someone asked it, I think Christy asked this, like, how do you, as you build a big following, like, how do you keep people engaged? It's really about posting different types of content. And this is something which I think I've done well is you never really know what's coming next for me. Like I could be a text post, could be a video, could be a meme, could be a poll. I've gotten to a point now where it's like, I put out lots of different content. So it's been able to keep people engaged, but I think you can micro do that by just, by posting company, by posting open work, posting like these different themes and just doing it regularly. And at the end of the day going, is this industry article, is it going to add value to the candidates that I'm reaching out to? Like, is this something that's going to impact their career? Is it something that they need to be thinking about? That's what you want to be thinking about. And it doesn't matter if you don't have to be like a thought leader with it, but it's just, starting, I think of it like try and be someone that starts conversations. And again, mind shift is the idea isn't just to be like a microphone of just like blah, blah, broadcasting. The real goal is to like actually create meaningful connections, just like we did 3 years ago. Like we had a conversation offline and that was always the goal. How can I start conversations offline? Bring it offline. That's the goal.
For sure. All right. I'm going to ask you a good one now. We didn't talk about this before, but I feel like if anyone can answer this question expertly, you can. How do people handle the trolls, the negative Nellies that show up on posts and always have something terrible to say? Because I think that a lot of people might hold themselves back from posting content because they don't want to deal with it. I know I have my own tactics for it that I'm curious what your advice is for people who want to just stay away from that negative side of social media, which unfortunately exists.
Yeah, look, you can't. I'll say like, look, LinkedIn is actually probably one of the more safer platforms, unless you're going viral, where you start reaching like the third degree connections. I mean, LinkedIn's fairly like a fairly safe and friendly place. I think because most people have like name of the company and that they work for. But obviously you're still going to get people. And I think then you have to look at like, what is trolling? Like, because I think it's great actually to have like, let's say you're working in the tech industry and you post an article and then you give your 2 cents. And then candidates start to engage with it and they're like, yeah, well, what about this? So they're kind of disagreeing with you. That's not trolling, right? Disagreement. I think if somebody's just coming at you and they're just negative and they just seem like they just are not interested in you, there's just ignore, move on, and at times block. Like I've had to block people. But I think like we also live in a day and age where like, I think sometimes people think that like a disagreement is trolling and it's not, right? And then it's like, I'm totally fine with someone disagreeing. But I think if you get to that point where like you really feel like someone's trolling you, I just say block and like move on. And also like one of the things that's really interesting is like your network will just see how you respond to that as well. So, it's like if you're just polite about it and like, okay, great. Or like if you just leave it hanging, it's like people are totally going to see that and they're going to move on. And again, I think it gets a little bit more like Twitter and TikTok. I mean, look, you post a TikTok, like you're probably going to get some kid with like a SpongeBob emoji profile picture, like, trolling you. And again, it's that same thing. It's like, I just have learned over time, like you just ignore people. It's fine. I think the other thing that comes up for recruiters more is they're worried about like candidates. Let's say like you got a candidate who's just like, we've all had candidates, right? That are just like following up and they're just not going to get the job or they're not fit, but they're super persistent. How do you handle those situations online? And I think, again, it's just like, hey, Sam, if a candidate posted on one of my posts about something or they were trying to get a hold of me, I just direct them to the DMs. And again, like I think one of the questions that comes up too is like, well, how do I deal with all of this inbound, from candidates that aren't qualified? That's another big question. Like, I don't want non-qualified candidates reaching out to me. And I think that holds back recruiters a lot of time. And the truth is look, I've got 1,200 connection requests sitting in my inbox right now from yesterday. Somehow yesterday I got a ton in there. And it's just like, I've just in my mind, I'm just like, you know what? It's not my responsibility to like even get back to everybody. And I think you just have to be okay with that. But I also have found like if you actually are online, there's like accountability there. And if people see that you're getting lots of reactions, or they see that you're getting lots of people comment on your posts, I just think people understand, right? And at the end of the day, if someone's really going to lose it over something like that, then they're really just showing like why they're not a good fit anyway, right? And someone you wouldn't want to work with. So I think like if focusing on that, it's just more of that fear-based mindset. And I think just put yourself out there, and you don't owe any. We as recruiters do not owe every single person like this in-depth response of like why we can't reach out to them. It's just it's just kind of the nature of how technology is. Like, it's so accessible. Like, anyone could send me an email. It's not my responsibility to get back to everybody, right? So I think you just have to put that out of your mind and focus on the positives of this stuff rather than the negatives.
Yeah. I think, like you said earlier, about choosing what content you are most comfortable with posting. If you're not comfortable posting personal, don't post personal. If you don't want to repurpose your company stuff, don't post your personal stuff. For me, my boundary is I will respond to every comment that I get, but my inbox is a colossal disaster. So if someone sends me an email or a DM, I'm probably not going to see it because there's just not enough time in the day. I don't have as many connection requests as you, but I just can't get to them all. And you're right, we don't have an obligation to people to answer them. And I think that's a big learning lesson for people who are maybe thinking about shifting into creating content, which is our great and final question for you before we shift to questions and comments that people have from the crowd or watching later. You're welcome to send them to us as well. But where do people start? Let's start with an individual and then we'll shift to company. How do you get started? What recommendations do you have for someone who is thinking today, yeah, I'd like to start creating some content?
Yeah, I think the best place to start is to not dive into just, hey, I'm going to post 3 to 5 times a day. And I think that, or 3 to 5 times a week. And I think a lot of people go to like step one is just creating content. And I actually don't think that's the best place to start. The best place is really to get consistent with the time you're spending on whatever platform it is. So if it's LinkedIn, we'll use that as the example. It's engaging in content that you're seeing first. So you mentioned it earlier, like if someone leaves a great comment, or you get into, maybe you leave a great comment somewhere and it starts a conversation, that is also valuable content. Like, every single time you post a comment, your whole network sees it, or a portion of your network will see that. Which, if you want proof of this, just go down your news feed and look at why each piece of content shows up. And this is how it works. The first piece of content is from your first degree connection. The second piece of content is going to be promoted in a paid ad. The third piece and the fourth piece are usually because somebody in your network liked the post or they commented on it. So every single time you comment, it goes to your whole network. So I always tell people, like, plan 20 to 30 minutes a day, each day, put it on your calendar first thing before the fires start, 8 to 8:30 LinkedIn time. And you're literally going through your newsfeed, anything that's to do with your industry, to do with a candidate you're looking to work with, anything that's potentially a prospect if you're on the agency side. Start getting used to that time commitment of just commenting. That's where you start. And then once you've done that, 2 things are going to happen. You're going to get more familiarity with like what type of content does well, so you can learn from consuming. And then the other thing which will happen, which you already mentioned, is you'll start to see like which comments start good conversations, and then you can start to build off that. So you can start to build and create content based on those comments. So you're not going in to creating content, just completely blindly. And then the next step, as you start to get into content, is you just want to plan out, and you just want to understand, number one, like, who is the audience? What do they care about? And what's the type of content that they're going to be into? And then number 2, have a plan for when you go into the week. Like, all right, Monday I'm going to plan to post an open job. Wednesday I'm going to post something to do with employer brand, something the employer brand team came up with. And Friday I'm going to post a personal story. So you just start with at least planning out what you're going to post. I think a big mistake that people go into, and this is how I started, was like you just randomly are posting. And I'm a weird person because I just was able to stay consistent with that and it worked. But every other person that I know that has like just attempted to try and do content, they get to a point, usually 2 to 3 weeks in, where they just, number one, they just stop coming up with ideas and they don't know what to post. Or number two, other things become the priority, which is why I'm big on like just get the basic like time commitment down and then build from that point.
We all have 30 minutes of the day. I think that we can commit to it. Now, what about leaders who are on this call or watching it later who might be thinking, you know what, I'd really like to encourage my team to get started with this. And there's a lot of companies who might just throw the recruiters to the wolves, right? And say, we expect you to start producing content. The people who are on this call want to grow and develop their people. So where can they start to encourage their people to shift into content creation? And what resources do you have to offer people?
Yes, sign up for my training. No, just kidding. No, but look, I think like, number one, I think if you're a leader, it's so hard to get anything done if you're not doing it yourself. So I think like somebody who is on the leadership team, or someone who's on, really ideally an executive within a company. But let's say you just, you're running the talent team. I think you've got to lead by example. So if you're not posting content, it's a tough ask to ask anybody else to post content, right? So if you're not feeling comfortable with it, hard thing to get other people involved and on board. So that'd be the first step. Like, I think you've got to get active, and maybe it is investing in a training with someone like me who can just give you like the foundation. But when I work with companies, I have a foundational workshop that I run through that's over 2 days and walks through all the basics. It's usually customizable because each team kind of has a different focus, so they have different social media they're interested in. But then it doesn't end. What I do is I meet with the team consistently once a month. And this is the key. Like, you want to get conversations around content and you want to make it a team activity. So if each person's just working independently on content, they're likely to fail. If you're talking about it regularly, which is why I facilitate these conversations. So you're talking about, what are we going to talk about this month? What events do we have going on? What are we seeing in the market? What are our clients facing? What are our candidates going through? What is it? What are the macroeconomic factors that are impacting our candidates and our business? What are the new technologies that are coming in and impacting business? All of these things, you start talking about them as a team and then producing content from that point. And look, it's like any other initiative that you're looking to grow in. It's like DE&I. Like, if you're not talking about it, you're never going to make movement, right? And what happens is, a lot of things that I've noticed is things become really exciting for a moment in time, and then everyone's like, yeah, we're really committed to this. And then a couple months later, no one's talking about it and it's moved down the priority list. So I think with content in particular, you have to make it a priority, and you make it a priority by continually talking about it and working together as a team. And I think if you're able to do that, the teams that I've seen do that have lasted and they've seen the results. Because part of the problem with content is you mentioned it before, this is not a quick fix, right? I'm not suggesting that if you post one piece of content on LinkedIn, you're suddenly going to get a flood of candidates. It's not how it works. It's over time. And because it's a consistency game and a time game, you have to continually talk about it. You've got to make it engaging, and you've got to really convince the team, like, this is a good thing for your personal brand. And it's a good way for you to add value to the business outside of just purely filling positions.
Right. Sometimes we forget that social media is supposed to be social, right? It's not supposed to be an isolated thing that we do by ourselves. So doing it as a team, doing it to build community, doing it to scale those conversations, it's huge for everyone. I don't think social media is going anywhere. So it's an important tool that we need to build up in our companies and all of our organizations. So I hope that people will take advantage of everything that you have shared today. I did put his website and course into the chat for people to check out. If you are not following Joel on LinkedIn, you should. He is on all the other platforms as well. I do want to shift to, I know we started a little bit late with everyone here, so I want to shift to the last 10 minutes answering some questions, if that's okay with you, Joel.
And I
All
can
right.
hang out an extra 5 minutes too if we get those questions. I was gonna say too, if that course is really just like a do-it-yourself course. So if you're a recruiter and you're like, hey, I just want to know how to do this myself, you can walk it through it. It's 8 modules, covers everything from like every single type of content you can do on LinkedIn and like the basics with it, and then it gets into like what are the things that you can talk about, how to do it, and then I do talk about repurposing and just create a mindset in there. If you're looking for training for your team, I would just go to my LinkedIn. There's a link there to book a call. If you just go to contact me, I think it says work with me. You can just go there and we can have a conversation, and just really figure out like what exactly are you missing or what do you think I could help with. But yeah, any other questions as well? Happy to answer those as well. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Perfect. Thank you. I will put that link in there as well. I just pulled that from your LinkedIn profile, so I will drop that in the chat as well. All right, so first question from Cynthia. What if you have multiple lines of business? Should you align one business line to one social media site or be okay with posting your content on all sites? I provide fractional TA director level consulting and will be coaching parents and students in early career issues. That's a great question.
Yeah, that's I guess can you read the question again? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this.
What if you have multiple lines of businesses? Should you use Facebook for one, Twitter for one, LinkedIn for another?
Yeah, I think if you have multiple lines of business, I think you still want to approach it from that same methodology, like, right? So like, where are the clients for each of those lines of businesses? Where are they spending time? So I would think if you're with this early career stuff, I think a platform like TikTok is probably a great platform if your ICP is young people in their career, because a lot of the people, here's the interesting thing with like a platform like TikTok, it did used to be 18 and 19-year-olds 4 years ago, right? Now those 19-year-olds are 23, 24. So it's a lot of like early career people on there. So, but maybe the parents, maybe they're more on Facebook. So you just want to think about like with each business line, like who is the decision maker, who is the person I'm trying to reach, and where are they spending time? And then again, it kind of goes back to, you still have to understand like how each platform works just from like a mechanical level. So like Facebook is different to LinkedIn and just how the algorithm works, how people interact on the platform. So your strategy may be different. On Facebook, it's more than likely going to be around like a Facebook group that you're trying to pour people into so you can get in front of them, right? So you have a Facebook group strategy, whereas Instagram is going to be more about the stories, and it's going to be more about reels now, which are those short form video, whereas TikTok, it's all about video. Twitter and LinkedIn, those are more about text. So you kind of want to know where are people hanging out, and then you just want to learn, you want to look at like, where is the bulk of my business going to come from? That's where, again, you want to spend most of your time. And then you're kind of spending 20% of your time exploring these different platforms. For example, like I upload every single video I do on TikTok. I upload it to Facebook. And it's really funny because people, the organic reach of Facebook's dead. And I'm like, well, I got 100,000 views this week on videos on that platform because I just posted them on the platform. So is Facebook my major focus? No, but I still think it's worth putting content on there because it's a platform that people spend time on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Heather said earlier when we were talking about being genuine, as long as you stay genuine to yourself, your content will find its home and there is space for everyone on the spectrum. I absolutely agree. We don't need to be carbon copies. I couldn't be Joel if I tried my hardest for the rest of my life to do it exactly like Joel does. And I think we have to be authentic with it. Another great question is, once you built the volume of followers, what were some best practices you implemented to keep people engaged for future career opportunities? And what were your biggest learning curves?
Yeah, I think I think just keeping people engaged is just a challenge. And that's why I've been a big proponent of switching up the content that you're producing. And I think when it comes to a candidate journey, you just have to understand that like there's a fraction of people that I mean, this is why like when when you source 50 people, not all 50 of those people are ready to make a move, right? We all understand that. So it's like, this is the hardest thing about recruiting is it's like, it's most of it is timing. Like if I reach out to you this year, you're not interested. A year from now, though, now you're open. So I think having that mindset of like, it's a journey. So every single candidate that rejects me, says I'm not interested right now, says maybe in the future, this is where the content and just being valuable to them. And that's where sharing like industry insights that are going to impact them, sharing job seeker tips. Like here's a resume tip for all of my candidates that are out there. And this is how you become the useful recruiter. And the goal is that when I'm surely in 2 to 3 years, 90% of those candidates will be ready to make a move. You want to position yourself so you are the first person they're thinking of. And if it's just something as simple as you just sharing regular industry news with your 2 cents on it, that's taking you 2-3 minutes, that's where you start to see over time those candidates coming back and going, yeah, I know we had a conversation 6 months ago and I wasn't ready. Now I am. And then if you ask them, well, why were you thinking of me? And they're like, well, I see you on LinkedIn all the time. You're always posting like jobs. And I use one of your resume tips and it helped me land an interview at a company I wanted to work for. And so that's how you then become like that useful recruiter. And then that's how you get referrals as well. Because again, anyone who has, been in recruiting long enough knows like getting referrals is huge, right? And like we're supposed to ask, like, who else do you know that would be a good fit? I don't actually find that is that effective for getting referrals, but what I do find effective is when you're producing content and you're top of mind as that valuable person, when they hear about someone in their network that's looking for a job that's likely got that same professional experience, they're thinking of you and they're sending you those candidates. So that's how I think of it. It's like just staying top of mind, so you are that go-to person that they trust, and they just think, yeah, you're helpful. You're a helpful recruiter. You're not like those other recruiters that just ghost me and then I never see him again, right? So that's the kind of the mindset with that.
Perfect. Great segue into the next comment from Savannah. And I won't read the whole thing for it, Savannah. I think you bring up some really great points. That it's not ghosting unless you stop communicating with someone who you initiated contact with and actually had a conversation with. So there's only so many hours in the day. We know we can't respond to everyone. So I'm glad that he had some good insights for you. Another question, do you open LinkedIn notifications on your mobile device during personal and family time? Because I can't stop myself and I'm not even a content creator. I'm always just anxious to see if a candidate has answered.
This is such a great question. And like, I have like hour-long limits on every platform on my phone. And it's a warning will come up and it'd be like, hey, you spent an hour on each platform. It's 10 platforms. So it's not 10 hours a day. No, but I think like with the notifications, like I actually have all my notifications turned off. And I just think this is like, this extends past just social media. I mean, you said like you're not a creator. So you're just, hey, did I get that DM right? And it's just understanding that like ultimately the goal of all of these social media platforms is to keep people on it so they can push and generate ad revenue. That's the goal of it. Like LinkedIn makes billions of dollars of ad revenue. So I've turned off all my notifications. The part about the family time and the personal time, it's an extreme challenge. And I'm definitely not like I haven't figured out the solution outside of just like when I'm spending time with my family, like I'm trying to be present. And I'm just listening to like my wife with that, where she's like, dude, just put the phone down. Or like even my daughter now, she's 4 and she'll just be like, daddy, off phone. You're supposed to be playing with me. And so I think you just have to regularly check yourself. But look, it's going to be the same with everything, right? Like my Gmail I get tons of emails and it's like, I think it's just like a society kind of issue. But personally, I turned off my LinkedIn notifications a long time ago. And I know, Christy, you had mentioned you try and get back to everybody with comments. I gave up on doing that a long time ago as well, because it's just too much. And I just had to realize like the goal again is to like, I care more about these interactions, like these, us having a conversation, our relationship, than I do with like someone random who's mad at me because I didn't reply to them. I just try and keep that in my mind.
I think it's different for everyone. To piggyback off that, I do my LinkedIn for the first part of the morning, and then once I start my work day, you will notice that I pretty much disappear from the platform, other than maybe a couple of comments here and there. It's going to be different for everyone, and you can trial it out, but it is a hard balance when you get all those notifications for sure. I love Annette's comment here. She said leaders should provide access to resources such as marketing content, standardized, consistent talking points, branding resources, so that recruiters do not have to figure out what logos branding to use. I agree completely.
And that's where it's and that's where it's like, you have your, if I was to map it out, like the perfect strategy: personal content, so non-work related content, employer branded content, industry news, job seeker tips, and then open jobs. That's 5 days. That's five. And so, yes, you want to have a centralized, like whoever's communication, employer brander, marketing team, you want to have centralized resources that recruiters can go to. I know like people who will do like the images for like the job postings, and it will have like the branded images. I love that stuff because it reinforces that you're working with the brand you're associated with. And again, the goal of a personal brand is not to detach yourself from the brand you're working with. It's to like build your awareness and deepen the connections you already have, and represent the company you're with as well. So absolutely, it's companies need to be providing those resources.
For sure. Everyone, I know that we are 2 minutes over. I did want to make sure we got through all the questions because we had the tech issues in the beginning. So I don't want to keep anyone longer than they have allotted any time for. I want to be mindful of time. The last question, which I think is a good one to end on, is can you tell us any creators that have influenced or inspired you, Joel?
That's a great question. I think when I first started creating content, it took me a while to actually find recruiters that were producing content. Funnily enough, at the time, it just wasn't as much, and now there's a lot. But I think for me in the recruitment space, there's a guy called Joe Mullings. So some of you might know him. He's in like the med device space. He has an agency, but his content is amazing. He's like a thought leader in his space. Like he's an agency recruiter that gets asked to speak at like his industry, which is like med device and like biotech. So but if you look at his content, I think it's a great roadmap, and everybody in his agency also creates content, and he has a rule: he won't even let people do video until they get good with writing. So he's been a huge inspiration. And then I think like Gary Vee at times, like I don't love Gary Vee's content now, but he definitely was like somebody who, I think for a lot of people, he inspires people at the beginning of their journey to like get started. But I had been creating content for maybe like 3 or 4 months, and then I ran into his stuff, and he's definitely somebody that just reinforced this idea of like content is a long game. And like here's how I've been thinking about it. Like I'm only 4 years into this. I will be creating content now for the rest of my career. And so I'm excited about where am I going to be in 10 years or 6 years from now. And what's interesting is in the 4 years that I've been creating content, I've seen so many people who like 2-3 years ago were like, this is stupid, this is a waste of time. And now they're like, yeah, I'm all about it. Like I want to get started. And so I think now it's been cool to see myself become like an inspiration for people. But I'd say those two people for me have been people that I've really inspired me. Someone else I think you should check out for like who I think are doing a really great job as like recruiters right now. One of them is my friend Adam Posner. He's got the Podcast, but he's basically a great model to follow if you're looking to like do like a long form piece of content and then show up consistently. And another recruiter I think is doing a great job is this guy called Taylor Dessen, who's over at Vaco, and he does a lot. He's like documenting his journey, but I've also noticed he's getting like keynotes at like a lot of tech conferences, and he's doing a really, really, really great job with his personal brand. Now, if you look at both of those guys, they're not going viral. They're not getting millions of reactions. They don't have hundreds of thousands of followers. I think Taylor probably has like maybe 15,000 on Twitter, 20,000 on TikTok, and 20,000 on LinkedIn, which is a lot. But if you look at how he does it and how they do it, it's much more of a focus of just consistency, rather than like just viral posts, if that makes sense. So definitely check those guys out.
Great. I did put those into the chat for people if they want to check them out.
And Krista, I mean, come on. You inspired me to start producing content on TikTok, by the way.
Oh, well,
Because
thank
you've been I think it's like my sister went viral on TikTok, and that's kind of like what got me looking at the platform. And I was like, man, Krista is just pumping out content on here. And then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna pump more content out.
you do a lot more, that's for sure. But thank you. I appreciate that. That's a lovely compliment since you were the one who inspired my journey. So thank you so much for doing this with me, Joel. This is a great honor. I hope everyone had some great takeaways from it. I think the last piece of advice I'll share is don't expect to post a piece of content and go viral and get millions of followers. I think Joel would agree with me. It's very much a slow burn. Some people will go viral instantly, but that is not the
shouldn't be the goal.
Yeah, it shouldn't be the goal. I agree.
And it just creates more. Let me just tell you, like, people always, what's the ROI? I haven't really reached I don't think there's like an ROI like number that you reach. Cause again, it's like in my mind, I'm like, I just am creating, and the awareness has grown.
Mhm.
But there's also like, again, like talking about Gary Vee, there's people this guy has millions and millions of followers. And there's probably people on his call who don't know who he is, which it means that it's just, even if your brand is millions of followers, it's like there's always people that don't know you, and you can always get your brand out there. And at the end of the day, I'm more of a fan of, as recruiters, like building that strong, valuable network.
Mhm.
You know, once you go viral, you start getting people that you're never going to work with, and it's just a lot of headache.
And don't put that pressure on yourself, right? With starting out, don't try to be the big brand names. Be you, be authentic, reach your audience, reach the people that you want to reach, and really nothing else matters. I see a lot of people who give up, right? Because they'll put a piece of content out and then they stop because they only got a couple of likes. I promise you, my first post in June 2023 probably still has 2 likes on it, and that's okay because that's not the goal, and I'm okay with that. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. For anyone watching on the replay, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back next week, next Thursday, for our roundtable to share all of our insights and thoughts, kind of strategize and innovate together. So I encourage you to register for the roundtable as well. Joel, thank you so much. Always an honor to speak to you. An hour always flies by anytime we get on a call. So thank you so much, my friend. I know 3 years has flown by, 1 hour flies by.
Love it.
All
Thanks,
right.
Krista. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.